Good morning, and welcome to Matt's Book Reviews. When you are in bed and you you don't want to get out of bed, ask yourself, was I born for this? To just sleep more? Or do I have a duty as a human to get up and go move some stuff around and then die anyway? Yes, this is a review of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I read the Gregory Hayes translation, and I did like it. There was a lot of interesting stuff, but well, A, I didn't read the introduction, and B, I didn't read the notes. I read, I think, like just a couple of the notes along the way, but so I just read the main text, and I've got to say, this book this book gets away with a lot of assumptions comes to mind, but let's say just a lot of unfounded claims. So it doesn't seem like Marcus Aurelius, the writer, the original writer, if we are to believe the story of this book, is some kind of like hardcore like believer in quote unquote the gods of Rome, but he talks about the gods, and he sort of de-anthropomorphizes the gods in some sense. He gives in the Debts and Lessons chapter, which, by the way, if you're interested in reading it and you're like you get stuck on that chapter, I, please just flame me endlessly if I'm not going to recommend to skip that, because even when I listen to an album these days, I don't skip a song. Even with I love the album Dude Ranch by Blink-182, which if you like the songs of, I'd say check out The Enema Strikes Back, because the songs sound like they're from Enema of the State, but many of them are from Dude Ranch, and maybe the album before that as well. But whereas Dude Ranch has sort of not a black metal production, but a production that like sounds much harsher. Like it sounds, it doesn't, like if you listen to that after like having just heard some of the singles from Blink-182 in your life, you'll be like, wow, like this sounds really rough. But it's a good album, and as I've listened to it more times, I've been like, yeah, I get when people say like these songs are better written than the later Blink-182 songs, or maybe the earlier ones, I guess, as well. But like there are a couple skits in that album that are just gross to me, and actually, I think maybe the one time I've skipped any of them was like yesterday when I was listening to the end of the album, and I was just having a horrible time, and I was like, I can't fucking take this ending fucking skit where this guy is peeing and like making these disgusting, gross noises, and then he has the dog come and like, drink the pee out of the toilet. I'm not doing it, and so I think I might have just paused it, or maybe I turned the volume down. If I paused it, I'm going back and I'm fucking listening to it. But if I didn't, you know, but like there like even just things that like really get on me, it would be seen in like albums and stuff, or like songs that maybe I haven't been as big of a fan of. I'll listen to that whole damn album all through. Like, oh, do you want to listen to a song from Nightfall and Middle Earth, Matt? Occasionally I'll listen to a song, but it's like I'm listening to fucking Nightfall and Middle Earth in full. And if anyone ever sees this who was one of my friends in high school, yes, I have started listening to Blind Guardian. No, I haven't listened to all of their stuff. And I'm not sure if the edition of A Night at the Opera is remastered in such a way where eventually I'm just going to buy the original mastering, because it just sounds a little strange. Metal remasters, I'd say check out listen to some of the clips of the songs for metal remasters before you just go and buy the remaster, even if that is like the only version that seems to be available, like on iTunes or something. I'd say look into it first because it's, as DBDR would say, it's brutal. Like the difference between Euthanasia, the original, and Euthanasia, the remaster. I literally listened to the original and had it, and then like a year later or something, ended up buying the remaster in addition to it because it's so different. And I'm so glad that I bought Brave New World as a CD closer to when it came out because what I've heard of the remaster, it's different enough where, like by Iron Maiden, this one it is different enough. It is different enough where it just, again, it's brutal. It's like, oh man, like why did they change this album? And a lot of the Megadeth albums that I have, I listen to the damn remaster. Like I bought the remaster, and that's just the version that I've been listening to. And it's like, Rust in Peace. Maybe I hope someday I may buy the original mastering of Rust in Peace, and if I do, I think I might be like, oh wow, like I really actually like this a lot more now. I won't say I dislike Rust in Peace, but I think I'm missing something. But anyway, with Meditations, how did I get off on that tangent? Oh yeah. So with Meditations, I would not recommend it for you to skip that first chapter, and I would not recommend that. But if you're like having trouble getting through that first chapter, know that the book turns totally on its head after that first chapter. The first chapter is like basically nothing but what I'm starting to criticize it for, and after that, at least it's a little more explanation. But in the first chapter, you'll see it's debts and lessons, and he like names someone, and then he says like courage, like he's talking about the lessons these people have taught him, and he's like courage and frugality, and it's like he just lists like three like generic or general virtues, and it's like, oh wow, like it's interesting, I guess, but it's like maybe more than 10 pages of him just like naming someone that you probably don't know unless maybe you've read an introduction or unless you're more knowledgeable in like Greek culture and stuff. Although if you've seen Gladiator, maybe Maximus is the same character, but and that's sort of interesting to see. By the way, this is just tobacco, and in a couple weeks, I'll probably be smoking pot because it will be legal for me to do so. If it's not legal for me to do so in any way, I will not be. But this is tobacco, but it's just so much cheaper to roll it. But yeah, so I have not smoked pot since at least April 2019, maybe before then. But nor have I drunk alcohol since then. Jeez. But anyway, in the world today, what do you expect? How do you expect to be treated? But meditation. So it's a lot of the first chapter is just him sort of stating vague virtues. Like if you listen to some Ryan Holiday stuff, he's like the virtues of the Stoic. That's not a great impression of him, but the virtues of this. I think I could probably do a better impression of him if I sort of practice. But he talks about the virtues of the Stoics, like courage is calling, discipline is destiny, whatever, stillness is the key, blah, blah, blah. Maybe to varying results in his books, but in it, in the first chapter of Meditations, Marcus Aurelius is like, well, I like Maximus because he was always nice to people, but he was never too nice. Or, I mean, this is probably a little not giving him quite as much due, but it's not that far from what the book is like for that chapter anyway. It's like, I like this guy, Antoninus, for his severity, but his practicality, or like he never said too much, but he didn't say too little. And, it's just like sort of these vague assertions about these people, or even just using a word for a virtue, and then like he doesn't explain beyond that. And in a sense, it's like, oh, like that's interesting. It's like it's somewhat helpful think like, oh yeah, like be courageous, but don't be foolish. Like those are, those can be advantageous things. It can be to advantage of yours to sort of say like, yeah, I'm going to have courage. But for a book that's so famous, and for a book about like philosophy or so called, he uses the word philosophy many times in varying levels of praise for it. And he's like, don't. In one part of the book, he's like, well, philosophy should be simple or something like that. Like, if philosophy, has you just tying yourself up on knots in so many words, then it's not really philosophy or whatever. But at the same time, it's like, yes, but there's a difference. I think there's sort of there are extremes of just saying, be good, and 200 pages about what the word good means. And you know what? Like, I'd be interested to see it if the latter, if it wasn't some kind of just like garbage, like, there is no morality and good is just whatever you want it to be. Like, if somebody actually had like 200 pages about what the word good means and they made sense, would that not be like the holy grail of philosophy, as Stefan Molyneux says universally preferable behavior is? From what I've seen of UPB, I'm not quite sure about it, but, like, if somebody really, like, did 200 pages about what the word good means, and they, like, had it founded in, like, arguments and stuff, that could change the whole fucking world, as opposed to, like, be good. And I think meditations is a lot closer to the be good thing. And, it's certainly not like the sort of ivory tower so-called, like, oh, like it's sort of, I've, in some audio recordings about it, I've characterized it as refreshing, maybe, to have it be like pretty direct. But in its directness, it almost loses its value. It also has a lot of, as I was starting to say, like, it has a lot of unfounded statements in it. Like, he'll be like, well, was man not made to help others? And it's like, I don't know. Was man made to help others? Like, was man made? Like, I'm not the person who's necessary. Although I was described in college, or at a certain point in college, I was described as a card-carrying atheist. Although that was in contrast to me having gotten into meditation and stuff. But these days I'm not going to be the person to be like, oh, well, you say there's a God, you better prove it. Like, it's more like, it seems like he makes these statements, and he'll often, like, with sort of like more theologically slanted things, things like that will often be contrasted with like, well, if it's the gods, then this, and if it's atoms, i.e. if it's just maybe like a materialistic world, and it sort of seems almost anachronistic for him to say atoms. ATOMS, did they really? I would think it'd be more atom than atoms back then. Like, were they talking about atoms in the days of Marcus Aurelius? I'm no, like, believer in scientism either, so are there atoms? I don't know, that might just be a psyop, but, and I mean that truly, please don't take my video down, YouTube, I'm not totally sure about anything, but, often he will say, like, sort of, well, if it's the gods, or if it's nature, capital N nature, in this translation, he talks about nature a lot, and he often talks about capital N nature as in, maybe the Tao, or, the essence, or whatever, the universe you might trade in, whatever he means by it particularly. I don't want to trade in something that isn't what he means by it, but it sort of strikes me in a similar way to saying, like, the Tao, like the way of things, nature, the unmoved mover maybe, or the start of things that now he gets into almost determinism sometimes, but either way, he often puts like spirituality, like maybe it's this, or maybe it's just sort of more like close to materialism, and he'll often sort of say like, either way, what I'm saying is the way to go. And it's interesting because he does sort of thread the needle well in some ways with that. Like, he's like, if it's the gods, then what I'm saying would be correct in this way. But if it's not the gods, then what I'm saying is a good thing to do anyway. And really, like, I kind of like that because that's, you would hope that whether it was like sort of a god or a god situation or not a god situation, it would make sense either way to follow a similar path of virtue or activity. You know, you would hope that I would be doing the same thing whether it was a god or it was no god. Like, you would hope that it would make sense either way. Like, essentially, you would hope that to be a good person, it doesn't matter if there's a god there or not. Like, being a good person or like working effectively is going to be similar either way. You know, like, one would hope that that would be the case. And, you know, he threads a needle pretty well. There's a YouTube video, Marcus Aurelius, the man who solved the universe, which is or something like that, which is actually like a really cool name for a video, and the video is pretty cool. But, you know, like, in that way, he offers some like really interesting advice, and sort of he does justify that advice. He like backs up that advice fairly well. But in another sense, like, often in the book he'll make these statements again, like something like, well, you know, was man not made to help others? Or, you know, oh, you feel like you want to stay in bed, like, get up, like, you've slept long enough. And like, Ryan Holiday has talked about this section many times, or I've heard him talk about it more than once, I think. But it's like, get up, you know, you've slept long enough. What are you here to do? Are you here to sleep longer? And it's like, well, Marcus, I think that is a big question. And it seems like you're just sort of saying, like, no, you're not here to sleep longer. And then you're not really explaining why that is. You're just sort of almost doing more of like a David Goggins, indeed, almost more of a David Goggins thing, where it's like, you know, like, you just got to keep running and you got to keep pushing yourself and you got to, you know, always push yourself and push yourself. And when I first heard about David Goggins from one of my bosses, he had said he'd listen to Joe Rogan, and he's like, you know, be like David here. He talked about David Goggins anyway. And I think that might have been the first time I heard of Goggins. And I think the first, like, thing I said about him might have been like, well, why push yourself? Like, what's the point of pushing yourself so much? It's like, just to endlessly push yourself forever until you die. Like what's the, not necessarily like a transactional thing maybe, but it's like, really, what is the point of just pushing yourself, and then you die? Like, was that what, unless you enjoyed, and I'm not here saying like, oh, it's all about enjoying your life and, you know, screw everybody, screw everything, screw being honest, screw all this stuff. It's just, if you're not enjoying your life, then, you know, then what's the point? But at the same time, it seems to go to another extreme, or sort of a tertiary extreme, where it's like, just push yourself forever. And it's like, why? You know, like, oh, you know, you're in bed and you don't want to get out of bed. What's the point of living if you're not, you know, getting out of bed when you'd rather stay in bed? It's like, I don't know, like, why are you going to justify that getting out of bed, like, right away when you'd rather stay in bed longer is, like, are you going to explain why that is a better thing and a more human thing? Like, because there's sort of the hedonism of, like, I'm just going to, you know, do whatever you like, if it doesn't feel good, like, blah, 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 like, oh, lie, cheat, steal, whatever you can get away with, maybe more of a Machiavellian thing, or not even that, because he's sort of a push yourself kind of guy too. But there's sort of like the, like, you know, fuck it all doesn't matter, the moral relativistic Pride Month. So then there's more like the virtue thing, sort of like the ascetic kind of, maybe not ascetic, but, you know, not really, but this is tobacco again, please. I'll show you the fucking bag again. But, and look, I've used a lot of it. But, you know, there is sort of the lifestyle of like sort of strict morality. And, you know, I try to go towards more of that, but then there's like sort of the hedonism, like moral relativism, like nothing. See, the nothing matters. I kind of like the nothing matters stuff as well, more like the stranger kind of nothing matters. But even into the nothing matters, I'd sort of more gravitate here. But then there's another one, which I think is kind of more Machiavellian, actually, and it's a little more David Goggins, and it's a little more Marcus Aurelius, where it's like, you must do, get out of bed. Like, what are you doing in bed? Like, get out of bed. What are you here to do? Like, push yourself, push yourself. And Marcus Aurelius isn't like that much of a drill sergeant kind of guy as much as like David Goggins would seem to be. And I don't want to shit all over David Goggins. I have Can't Hurt Me in the other room. I think he's an interesting guy. Like, I think there's some likable stuff about it. Maybe I'll do a review of Can't Hurt Me if I read it someday. But, I've read I think I read like the first chapter, but well, it's not a very David Goggins thing to do. So like here you go. Here's like the strict morality for like sort of like morality's sake, or maybe for like more of an enlightenment thing, like a be ye perfect kind of thing. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, which is really more of what I'm in, and then or what I have gravitated in, and then whatever. We'll have a discussion about the shape of the earth another day, baby. But I've probably got a banner ad for that if this video has stayed up. But then you have like the hedonism, like, oh, it doesn't matter. But then there's like another one where it seems to be just like pure ego, and maybe it's like the id, the super. Well, that's actually interesting. I'm sort of describing the id, the super ego, and the ego, and so it seems more like pure ego with like the kind of the David Goggins. Again, I don't want to like shit on this guy too much, but also kind of the Marcus Aurelius, where it's like, get up, like you enjoy staying in bed, like just were you put here to like stay in bed all the time? Get up. And most of the meditations isn't like that much of an ego thing. Most of it, I would say, drifts a little closer to this than to this or that. But like some of it does, at least that section seemed to be more like this. And it's like, is it its own virtue just to like push yourself and be all you can be, like the army said, which is sort of, that is, Matt McKinley said it, and I think maybe Unnamed Reality Book 24, but he said, I think he might have said it was kind of a truth drop, the be all you can be commercials for the army. And it is kind of funny too, because it might be a truth drop for like essentially saying that all people are fucking scum. And it's like, oh, be all you can be, and all you can be is to join the army and go do whatever horrible things we want you to do. That's all you can be as a person. Like, maybe that's a truth drop. Maybe they're just saying like, yeah, you're all animals. I don't know, but. And I'm not calling all people in the army animals, but I am saying that it seems like people in the army are treated like animals, and to a large extent. And go look at the Mark Passio stuff, where he says that the dark occultists will often call police and soldiers and stuff their dogs or their pets. And they call it fucking dog tags. The little like chain around your neck with your nameplate on it, they call it a dog tag. Like, really? Oh wow! I'm sure that has nothing. There's no like connection in that name to them treating people like animals, or considering the people in the army fucking animals. Oh, just wear your fucking dog tags and do what I say. Do what I say. Do what I say. Wear your dog tags. It's like. So, but it sort of seems similarly insane to me to be like, oh, you want to stay in bed a little longer? No, get out of bed. Get out of bed. It's just like, but then there are these unfounded things where he's like, oh, who are you to, there's a part in the book where he's like, he actually says something, and it might be sort of more of a Tao kind of like following the flow of events thing, but he actually says something like, well, it's like the person in the courtroom or something who goes against what everyone else is doing, and he's casting that person in the negative light, or like the I think he says the person in this translation. It is I think in this translation it is I think he's like the person in the assembly, whatever he's referring to as the assembly, who like goes out of step or something. Maybe he's referring to like a fucking Rockettes thing, like, and if you're out of step, then you're screwing it up. Like, in that case, I guess I get it, but he's like the person in the assembly who goes out of step, and he refers to that person as the one who's wrong, and yet elsewhere in the book, he's talking about like people being boorish and all these people like behaving badly, and like, why do you expect someone to behave? You already got, if you were in touch with your nature, capital N, it would have been easy. it would have been evident to you that this person was going to act that way. Which, by the way, if you get more in touch, like that's true. Like you can tell how someone's going to act. Like if you can look at someone and be like, that person's going to fucking do something obnoxious. Never seen him before, never met him before, and often they're going to do something obnoxious. You can just get the sense from these monsters. But anyway, and I'd say most people are monsters, but most people are how it seems the army was referring to them, But anyway, it. And with this whole Marcus Aurelius thing, it's just like he spends so much time, like rightfully so and refreshingly so, he spends so much time shitting on people and saying like, don't behave like these animals. There's even a great, I think it's in book 9 or chapter 9 or whatever. There's a great, by the way, referring to them as books rather than chapters, that seems a little pretentious to me. Like, it seems a little biblical to me. Biblical, actually, as well. It seems a little pretentious to be like, the first book of the Bible. It's like, oh, Genesis is a book? It's 60 pages long? That's a whole book? Oh, great, okay. I'm not here to blaspheme, but he's, I think it's in book 9, he says something pretty interesting. He's like, well, he's talking about death and like accepting death and stuff. And he's like, well, why would you want to stay here if not to, and like, I think he gives a couple of reasons, but one of them is like, if not to be with people who like think the same as you. And then he sort of, I think he says something along the lines of like, and these people don't think the same as you. And he's like, why, essentially he talks about how like, these people have forgotten themselves and you want to leave before you forget yourself too. And it's like, that is perfect. Like, yes, that is living in this fucking world today. All these evil monsters around you that have totally just like shitted on their humanity. They have no fucking virtue, no value in them anymore. They're just a fucking mask of sneering and evil. And like, you have your evil people like supporting the baby killing on one side, but then you have your evil, disgusting people who've been brainwashed by, probably seem like they're more brainwashed by the right-wing stuff on the other side, and just like go around with these like sneering faces. And it's like, no, you're all evil. Like, all of you are just scum. But it's like, so the same Marcus that is saying like, oh, one person who steps out of line in the assembly, like he's the bad one, or in so many words. Or he talks about like, he often talks about like capital N nature, like, well, who are you to argue with what seems to be your position in this world? There's a very deterministic streak in a lot of it, or at least he's, sort of entertaining the idea of determinism a lot. And he's like, who are you to criticize it when, with all of these people, like, in this society, all the people seem to be, like, working towards, like, one goal. He's like, the people of like society wouldn't work against its own goals, or something along those lines. In one part, he's like, well, like the part cannot do something, or the whole cannot do something that is bad for the part, or something. And it's like, are you kidding me, Marcus Aurelius? Like, have you seen what happens to some people? It's like, go take a fucking visit to like Planned Parenthood. Oh, the whole can't do something that's bad for the part. I don't think those little babies want to be torn apart, Marcus. Like, or like, go look at like the people in Vietnam and the conception that we're told of Vietnam. I don't think all those villagers wanted to be murdered by like American soldiers. Like, oh, the whole can't do something that's bad for the part. It's like, that's a really like zoomed out cosmic perspective, and maybe on some macro level it's true, but like he just sort of just like, oh, everything that happens in this world, it is all just like, I mean, he doesn't quite say that, but there are a lot of parts where it seems like he's pretty close to saying like, essentially, whatever the will of the public is, like that's the right thing to do. And it's like, I don't know what kind of fantasy land time you were living in Marcus Aurelius, but that is not what it is here in